Hi folks! So July was a bumper month with an ambitious TBR pile which I just about managed to get through, greatly assisted by 10 days off work. Some of these books I've reviewed on the channel, but most I haven't, and with other things getting in the way I may never get around to it, so this might be as much as I can share for some of these books. So in reverse order then, Childhood's End brings up the rear for this batch. I didn't like it much. I felt the story was patchy, even for a short book, overlong. Perhaps it would have been better as a novella, or perhaps I just wasn't in the right mood for it. I did review this one so you can get more details on the channel. Next is Altered Carbon by Richard Morgan. I think this book couldn't decide if it wanted to be a detective noir, or cyberpunk, or future dystopia, or what. There were some cool concepts in the book. Humans can be re-sleeved, our consciousness downloaded into a spare body. It seems like the spare bodies are often those of convicted criminals serving long sentences in excess of 100 years. These downloads can then be needlecast or sent over immense interstellar distances to a receiving station in another location. It's a neat way of dealing with interstellar travel. I didn't not like this book, I just felt that it was a bit of a labour to finish it. I have a few of his other books, and I haven't been put off reading them. Martian Time-Slip is next. I like this Philip K. Dick better than the Three Stigmata of Palmer Eldritch. I did have a little difficulty with the practicalities of the book. In the novel, Mars' atmosphere is breathable, for example, and there are indigenous Martians. I suppose Mars is just a setting for an exploration of mental illness, or rather of neurodiversity. Dick uses a lot of labels for conditions which maybe don't stand up to modern examination. It seemed to be that people he described as not quite fitting in were automatically labelled as either autistic or schizophrenic. The book explored a notion that Dick plays with in other stories, that of precognition, the ability to see in advance what will happen. And in the book, some of those labelled as autistic are also precogs, and the plot deals with an attempt to co-opt one such child and abuse their abilities for commercial or political gain. The first of the Gap Cycle, The Real Story, is a book I have read before, though not for years. I'd forgotten the setup. The geezer walks into a bar with a beautiful woman, heads turn. Are they a couple? They don't look suited. Her eyes meet with those of a raffish hero type across the bar, and thus the essential character triangle is established. It's a novella. The book is quick to read and includes some difficult subject matter. I'll just say here that there are scenes of rape, sexual assault, and general abuse which are not easy to read. I do think that they serve a purpose in the book, highlighting the apparent helplessness of the female lead, Morn Hyland, and emphasising the nastiness and proper villain qualities of Angus Thermopylae. Morn uses Angus's sense of control against him later in the book, when it becomes clear that she wasn't nearly as helpless as it appeared. There are some interesting concepts in the book, from hyperspace-induced gap sickness, which can have terrifying results, a device for brain control, a zone implant, which is ostensibly to control the gap sickness, but can be used for nefarious purposes, and there's a significant criminal penalty associated with that. I enjoyed it, and I will read the other books which follow. Starship Troopers was a rollicking read. Heinlein's characteristic libertarian rants aside, perhaps. I like the description of futuristic battles, and I thought that the camaraderie between the men was well drawn, and I like the thread involving Johnny Rico's relationship with his father. I was intrigued by how it would compare with the movie from the 1990s, and I concluded that the movie was more of a satire on the book than an attempt to tell the same story. After Atlas by Emma Newman is next. The sequel to Planetfall, a book that I enjoyed very much a month or two back. I say sequel, it's not really a sequel from a plot point of view, but it is set in the same universe, and there are some more direct links in the latter part of the book. We follow Carlos Moreno, an indentured police officer. He's not an employee, more like a slave, bound by contract to work for the ruling GovCorp's Ministry of Justice for 80 years. With that time increasing each time he needs something, like a square meal that he can't afford. He's tasked with investigating the apparent murder of the leader of a cult that he was a member of as a child. There are political difficulties, with the GovCorps running the US, the UN, the EU, the UK, plus lawyers from the cult, all looking over his shoulder. Every man and his dog has an interest in the case, and not all of them are interested in the truth of things. The novel is really a police procedural, almost a futuristic Agatha Christie. Much of the book is even set in an old-world hotel in the English countryside. This is undoubtedly science fiction, though. There are brain implants, cool technology, a vaguely dystopian corporate sheen to the governments of the day. And I really like Newman's writing. The scope of the book suddenly widens towards the end, where the link to the first book becomes stronger, and there is a shocking ending which tees up the next book, Atlas Alone. Next up was Consider Phlebas, the first of the culture novels by Ian M. Banks. Some say that this is one of the weaker books in the series, and perhaps it is, but I think that's just a relative term. It might be less good than the others. Certainly it serves very well as an introduction to the culture, with the beginnings of some themes that he develops more deeply in later books. We get megastructures, high-tech weaponry, some insight into life in the culture, and its reasons for going to war against the Idyrins. Larry Niven has an entire book series about a ring world, a giant structure creating living space out of planetary material in the form of a flat ring surrounding a star. In Consider Phlebas there is also such a ring, but it is calmly and efficiently destroyed by the culture to deny the possibility of it being used as a logistical base for the Idyrins. There are nuclear trains, an interspecies love story, some great close-quarter battles, and a snarky drone. I was very happy to revisit this book and I enjoyed it a lot. I'm looking forward to rereading the rest of the culture novels over the coming months. Silverberg's Up the Line is next. A timey-wimey affair, there are mind-bending paradoxes aplenty. In the future we have the ability to travel back in time. The book centres around a temporal tourism business that transports small groups back to key moments in history. The protagonist, Judd Elliott, is a tour guide. There's a lot of historical hanky-panky, with Judd getting caught up in a love affair with one of his ancestors, something that gets him into real trouble with the time police. This is my second Silverberg novel and I was again impressed with his writing. Judd's attempts to wriggle out of his difficulties with the law get him into progressively trickier tangles, which don't help his chances of a good outcome. One thing from the book has stuck with me more than anything else. If tour groups are constantly being taken back to see the same key events, the crucifixion for example, there's only one crucifixion. So over time, no pun intended, that would build up to quite a crowd of tour guides and their groups, eventually trending to infinity. Silverberg does cover this a little bit, but I was left scratching my head wondering how they got around it. I enjoyed the book greatly and will be dipping into my growing collection of Silverbergs. The End of the Day by Claire North is next. I reviewed this on the channel so you can go back and get more details, but essentially the book follows the trials and tribulations of Charlie, the harbinger of death. He is employed by Death, who has offices in Milton Keynes, much to my amusement. It's his job to visit people Death deems need a visit. Sometimes it's a courtesy, sometimes it's a warning, and the death is sometimes imminent, sometimes avoidable. And sometimes it's not a person, more like a way of life that's on the verge of dying out. Memorably, there's a scene where a scientist is, having been on a TV talk show, is despairing that we've killed reason. I really like North's writing, which cleverly stitched together dozens of vignettes into a coherent story, using just 2 threads to make it whole. I liked it a lot. Next is Kindred by Octavia Butler. I was planning on reading The Parable of the Talents, and by the same author, but someone let me know in the comments of my July TBR video that this is the second book, and I might be better to wait until I've read the first. Soon after that, I found this copy of Kindred and read this instead. It's another timey-wimey book, in fact. The protagonist, Dana, is a black woman living in 1970s California. She is yanked back in time to save the son of a slave-owning tyrant. He's a young child at this time, but she is called back a number of other times in his life, each when some peril befalls him. As the novel progresses, it becomes clear what the connection between them is, and why it's important for her to continue to help him, despite his obvious flaws and the extreme danger that is an everyday threat for black folk living in a time of slavery in the southern USA. I thought that Butler handled the tensions well, and I thought that Dana was an excellent lead, very strong but relatable. I liked how Butler handled the time travel aspects, particularly the additional complication of time passing at different rates. Minutes back in the 1800s are hours in the 1970s, days become months, and months become years. It's a very good book, I highly recommend it. But on top of the heap is Elizabeth Moon's Remnant Population, which is actually the first of the books that I read of this lot. I really like the fact that the protagonist was not only female but also elderly. It's not a common combination. And I thought that Moon did an excellent job on the first contact scenario, and the developing communication and understanding between Ophelia and the indigenous aliens I thought was really well done. I particularly liked how the humans that arrive later in the book make loads of assumptions about Ophelia which come back to bite them in the arse as she runs rings around them. I did review this book on the channel, so you can find a more detailed exploration of this book and what I liked about it there. So that's all the novels, but I also plan to read some short stories from the mammoth book of best new science fiction. It's also got a mammoth title. I didn't think I'd be able to get through them all, but I did read 4 or 5 in the end, and I won't try to go into detail here, but suffice to say that I really enjoyed dipping into some bite-sized stories like this. I've read short story collections before, a single author's work, but I don't remember the last time I tackled an anthology of stories by different authors. I will continue to dip in from time to time. I have almost a whole shelf of other anthologies, so I have plenty to be getting on with. So that's July wrapped up, another set of good science fiction books, old and new, with Childhood's End the only real dud for me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye for now.